Overlord Volume 3 Chapter 5 PVN Part 1. There was the sound of sizzling, as though someone had thrown a burning torch into water. The spell, which surpassed the very definition of tears, went off, and it looked as though the sun had risen on the land, dyeing everything in his field of view a brilliant white. The exothermic conflagration generated a rapidly expanding wave of heat, which greedily consumed everything within its radius. This hell of a vision lasted only 5 seconds, but it felt dozens of times longer than that. Eventually, the brilliant white world disappeared. In the wake of the vanishing pulse of superhot energy was a large circular area vastly different from before. Nothing outside the area of effect was affected. The trees were still trees, the earth was as full of vitality as the forest, and the forest itself was untouched, an extremely normal world. In contrast, the area within the circular area was charred black, converted into a dead zone of jaw-dropping proportions. The awe-inspiring temperatures had consumed all the vegetation in the area, leaving only a few carbonized tree stumps. There were several vitrified areas on the ground which were still emitting smoke. Standing beyond the bounds of that world which permitted no survivors, Ains felt a dreadful presence washing out from within. It came from the only person who remained within that area. Nothing living could have survived that fatal heat. Kaha kaha. That strange sound, accompanied by what seemed to be a gnashing of teeth, filtered into Ains's ears. He turned to look at its source, and saw a point of red amidst a world scorched black. He saw Shaltia with wisps of smoke trailing off her body, and a look on her face which seemed to say, "Not enough gun." Quote, her crimson pupils, filled with hostility and bloodlust, focused on Ains's body. Ains-sama. That really hurt. Shaltia slowly walked forward, her footfalls fracturing the charred ground underneath. Step by step, she shrank the distance between Ains and herself, the spear lance in her hand cutting through the air with a whoosh which indicated that she was still able to fight. Arcane magic casters could only show their true ability at long range. Ains had no frontliners to cover for him, so there was no advantage in allowing his foe to draw near to him. Yet, Ains did not scramble back. In a tone which called to mind an image of a champion welcoming a challenger, Ains arrogantly taunted Shaltia. That was just a meaningless present. Did you like it, Shaltia? Aha. Shaltia laughed, and her mirth came from the bottom of her heart. Wonderful. To think I have to kill you, the all-powerful Ains-sama. Sama, you say? Why do you address me as Sama? Who is your master? What a strange question. Is it not natural to address a supreme being like yourself with Sama? As for my present master, Shaltia's face scrunched up, as though confused. Why do I have to fight you, Ains-sama? Ah, is it because you attacked me? But why would you attack me, Ains-sama? I need to destroy anyone who attacks me with all my strength. Why is that? Before long, Shaltia seemed to have come to a conclusion, and her smile from earlier returned to her face. Well, I'm still not too sure why, but since you attacked me, I must destroy you, Ains-sama. Is that so? I understand. I understand what kind of state you're in. Oh ho, what's wrong, Ains-sama? You look a little weak there. How can you beat me like that? HMPH, aren't you getting something wrong? Do you think someone like you can defeat me? Defeat Ains-sama? The name of Ains-sama is invincible. Shaltia, you will kneel in submission before me. Aha. Ooh, how scary. Moving with a speed which put Gales to shame, Shaltia charged, wreathed in bloodlust. The scorched ground exploded beneath her feet with every step she took. Clementine's assaults were swift, but Shaltia's speed was in a class of her own. For an instant, Ains was grateful that he did not need to blink, because Shaltia was fast enough that he would lose track of her if he took his eyes off her for a moment. Trailing laughter behind her, Shaltia continued her charge, aiming the tip of her lance at Ains and thrusting forward. The lance charge was originally a technique used by mounted knights and made with the speed and weight of their mounts behind it. However, Shaltia's strike, made with her extraordinary strength and her awesome speed, easily surpassed that attack. The word one-shot kill could not even begin to describe that assuredly fatal blow, and it tore through the air towards Ains. However, despite the ever-approaching tip of the lance, Ains remained unmoved. In a gentle voice, he said, "It's dangerous, you know." The tender warning he gave Shaltia, as though concerned for her well-being, referred to the countermeasure he had prepared for Shaltia's attack. As Shaltia attacked, the triplet Maximize Magic Exploding Mine spell which he had cast beforehand automatically triggered. The 3 explosions blew Shaltia's body away. As Ains saw this, he apologized in an even more compassionate tone. "Shaltia, please forgive my late warning. Actually, there were mines there. Maximize Magic, Gravity Maelstrom." She was still flying back from the force of the explosion when Ains hurled a black sphere after her. It was a spinning vortex of hyper-intensified gravity that could significantly damage a target, even one of Shaltia's level. At this moment, Shaltia stood back up from her downed state and held out an empty hand. Wall of stone. A vast wall of stone emerged from the ground, completely enveloping Shaltia. The gravity maelstrom Ains had thrown collided with the wall, causing it to bend, twist, and crumble, but the gravity maelstrom vanished as well. HMPH. Maximize Magic, Hold of Rib. As Ains followed up with another spell, massive ribs erupted from the earth and closed in on Shaltia like a bear trap. The sharp points of white bone bit deeply into Shaltia's body. Normally, this spell would have continued holding its target after damaging him, but Shaltia easily shrugged free. This was because she was immune to movement restrictions, resulting in the failure of the attempted restraint. "Shaltia, I forgot to tell you, but I've already set mines around this area. How about attacking me from the air instead?" "Ains-sama, I won't take the bait. You've put traps in the air too, haven't you? Was that so obvious?" "Yes, I saw through it long ago." She chuckled, and the red flames in Ains's eyes dimmed. There was nothing of the sort. The mines Ains had laid just now were the only set. Neither had he set traps in the air. This battle was not an easy one where he could waste MP on ineffective spells. Therefore, he had used the mines as a bluff to hamper Shaltia's mobility. He had narrowed his eyes after she had stepped into it. However, now was not the time to relax. Ains was the challenger in this battle. He was walking a very fine tightrope, and he would fall if he was not careful. Ains knew this, and he was not stupid enough to become complacent over a small victory like that. Still, that's Ains-sama for you. A simple charge like that couldn't close the gap between us. There was genuine admiration in Shaltia's eyes and her voice. At the same time, Ains could sense the fighting spirit she radiated from her entire body. The real show's about to start. If Ains's body could produce sweat, his back would probably be a flowing river by now. In any case, I need to keep doing damage until my MP runs out. If he could not do that, then Ains would be set on the road to defeat. Shaltia braced the spear lance, narrowing her eyes at the magic caster before her at her master, Ains-ul Gown. She had no idea why she had to oppose her beloved master, but her mind told her that it was not an important question. All she had to do was kill him and then ponder the matter at length afterwards. As she calmly considered this, Shaltia considered the current situation a one-on-one fight against an undead being and how favorable it was for her. Magic casters, particularly arcane magic casters, were incredibly powerful, but that power derived from their MP. Once their MP ran out, they would naturally lose their fighting ability. On the other hand, Shaltia might have been a divine magic caster, but she was also adept at melee combat. Even if her MP ran out, she could keep fighting as long as she had HP. Therefore, even if she could not deplete her foe's HP to 0, she could still win as long as her enemy expended all his MP. This was especially true for an arcane magic caster like Ainz, who had no means of recovering his health. So, please tremble in fear at your dwindling HP and MP. Ah, my heart pounds so hard whenever I think of Ainz Sama's terrified face. Then, what was the best way for her to fight? It would have to be a drawn-out battle. Shaltia gripped her divine class spear lance as she hastily threw a battle plan together. That weapon's special ability was to recover the wielder's health in proportion to how much damage it did to an opponent. No, one could say that this divine class item was designed around that special property. This was why Ainz, the eternal backliner, had not summoned any minions to be his vanguard. He was very aware that summoning weak monsters to tank for him would only serve to recover her HP. Ah, poor Ainz Sama. He can't summon frontliners and has to fight all by himself. Shaltia cast Mana Essence, as a sadistic grin formed on her face. That spell permitted her to perceive her opponent's mana for a while, and so Ainz's remaining mana appeared before her. That's a lot of mana. How did he amass that much? Ainz had about 1.5 times the MP mana of Shaltia. There was probably nobody else in Nazarick who had a mana capacity like that. He truly is a supreme being. One could call him an extraordinary undead. A super undead. No, a godly undead. That said, she still did not think that she would lose. Perhaps it might be different from the other guardians, but to Shaltia, Ainz and his enhanced necromantic attack spells were hardly a challenge for her. Of course, I mustn't be careless. That said, why isn't Ainz Sama wearing his divine class equipment? The robe Ainz wore now seemed very plain to her. It lacked the dignity of his usual black robe. Could it be that he wore it to deal with me? It's very likely, but there's no point just staring each other down. Nothing will happen. So let's restore some health first in preparation for a drawn-out battle. Regenerate. The spell Shaltia had just cast could even recover the health of the undead. Currently, it was restoring the health lost from the super tier attack spell. At this moment, Ainz launched another attack, throwing out a gravity sphere like just now. Maximize magic, gravity maelstrom. The black orb approached at great speed. She considered casting the wall of stone from before, but that would not put any pressure on her opponent. She would have to make the first move if she wanted to greatly decrease her foe's mana. Shaltia selected Greater Teleportation. The plan was to teleport into close range and begin melee combat. Her field of vision distorted, but the scenery that should have instantly appeared before her eyes felt like it had been slowed down. Shaltia guessed that this was the effect of the teleport impeding spell, delay teleportation. As Shaltia had guessed, she was quite a distance away from Ainz when she should have been deposited into the range of her spear lance. Instead, she saw 3 sparkling balls of light before her eyes made by the drifting mastermind spell. Shaltia sensed the mines and assumed her mist form to evade him as they flew toward her. This skill transmuted the body into mist, and it was quite a flavorful skill for vampires. However, it did not transform the body into the physical phenomenon called mist, but instead phased the body into the astral plane. Thus she could use it to completely avoid attacks in the physical world. The three explosions which resulted. Naive. After Ains's shout, he followed up with a maximize magic, astral smite. That spell could strike astral entities, and it found its mark on Shaltier's body, whose defense had been somewhat reduced after taking mist form. Racked by agony, Shaltier terminated her mist form. She felt her lips split, and something soft and slippery escaped from within. Truly marvelous, as expected of you, Ains-sama. Ains did not respond to that honest praise. He merely studied his opponent with doubtful eyes. You can't believe me, right? But I do feel you are someone worthy of my loyalty. He was very good at spell combat, after all. Still, Shaltier's lips could not help but curl up in a smile. This was because Ains's MP had diminished greatly. Shaltier's health had decreased somewhat, but that amount of damage was well within limits. In contrast, Ains's mana had gone much further down than anticipated, so it was well worth the loss. In other words, Shaltier was one step closer to victory. Then, how about this one? Shaltier made her move. Force Sanctuary. White radiance filled the area around Shaltier, a defensive barrier made of pure mana. While this barrier impeded the caster's attacks, it would also completely negate her opponent's attacks. Through this barrier of light, she saw Ains scrambling to cast a spell. That's right. If you don't cast a spell soon, it will go very badly for you. Shaltier already knew why Ains seemed to have the upper hand in this battle. Was it because of his abilities? No. Was it because of his equipment? No. Was it because of his preparations? Yes. Indeed, these favorable circumstances were due to Ains's extensive preparations and many spells which he had cast beforehand. The power of magic casters varied greatly with their preparations for any given situation, and the same applied to Shaltier. Therefore, Ains should have been trying to break Shaltier's defenses before she could buff herself up. Shaltier was poor at defensive spells, and she had no intention of casting them. Her aim was purely to drain Ains's mana. She smiled to Ains as he frantically cast his spell. My, everything's going according to plan, Ains-sama. Still, you're not even using scrolls, staves, or wands. Are you trying to preserve your strength? Are you too panicked? Or did you know they weren't effective against me? Ains's magic resistance completely negated the effects of low to mid-tier spells, regardless of how powerful their casters were. In contrast, Shaltier's magic resistance was affected by her opponent's stats and levels. Even a 10th tier spell by a weak magic caster would not be able to breach her resistance, but against a powerful magic caster like Ains, first tier spells were the limit. Some scrolls were affected by their creator's skills, but for the most part, they were made at the minimum possible level that allowed for their creation, which also meant that they were fixed at the lowest possible caster level. Thus, there was a high chance that scrolls would not be able to breach Shaltier's defenses. Was that why Ains had not done it? As Shaltier analyzed the combat conditions, Ains continued casting a spell. Maximize magic, 1000 bone lance. Countless, well over 1,000 or 2,000 lances of bone erupted from the earth around Ains. The ivory spears assailed the defensive barrier from all directions. Soon, she heard the sound of what seemed like glass cracking, and Shaltier's protective barrier shattered with it. Scattered chips of bone flew in all directions, melting away into nothingness. She had not expected this magic barrier upon which she had spent a significant amount of mana to be broken in one move. Shaltier was unable to believe this as the attack on her continued. It's not over yet. Maximize magic, 1000 bone lance. Greater teleportation. Her teleport destination was an open space in the air, outside of the delay teleportation spell's area of effect. Don't think you can get away. Maximize magic. Gravity maelstrom. Shaltir had expected Ains to follow up with some kind of attack against her. His spell came flying over, as though aimed at the place Shaltir would appear after teleporting. She seemed calm and collected as always, but Shaltir was quite fascinated by Ains's incredible prowess. These masterful abilities could only have been honed through long experience. You seem to be taking this quite easy. Shaltir's opponent, she was not quite sure why she had to kill him, asked. Why is it that you are so at ease while fighting me? We are on the same level, but my gear is stronger than yours. Granted, my specialty cannot be brought to bear, which is to my disadvantage, but that is all. Still, I can sense the confidence from you, your belief that you have the advantage and that victory is assured. A sense of superiority filled Shaltir. Aha, then I shall show you one of the reasons why I can take it so easy. Did you know I had a skill like this? With a smile of victory, Shaltir evoked an impure shockwave shield. A wave of force-colored reddish-black like clotted blood spread forth, disintegrating the gravity orb upon contact. This was one of Shaltir's skills, which combined offense and defense. Che. Ains clicked his tongue at this. Shaltir had done so earlier because things had not gone as planned, but for Ains, it was because he could no longer relax around her. Aha! Shaltir laughed at Ains's expression, and then she showed off another special skill of hers. A gigantic divine lance appeared in her hand. It was well over 3 meters long with an especially large head. The aura of purity it emanated proved that this was no ordinary weapon. It reflected the rays of the sun in its silver radiance, producing a beautiful and eye-catching display. Oh, I've never seen that before. Did you summon it with a skill or something? Aha, we'll see how long you can act tough, Ains-sama. Since you don't seem to know this weapon, allow me to introduce it to you. Its name is the Purifying Javelin. Shaltir released the platinum lance as she laughed at Ains's ignorance. She did not throw it like a javelin, but instead it rose by itself and darted out. This was a weapon which was guaranteed to hit if she spent additional MP. Gawa. And hit it did, piercing Ains's chest. In Shaltir's eyes, that unmoving skull seemed to twist in pain. Aha! That's a holy element weapon for you. It seems like it was quite effective. Shaltir summoned the gigantic lance to her hand again, and cast it forth once more. The lance traveled at unavoidable speed, this time piercing Ains's shoulder. Ku. Don't look down on me. Maximize magic, reality slash. Ains cast a powerful spell. When one reached the highest level of the strongest warrior class, World Champion, one would learn the supreme, ultimate skill called World Break. This 10th tier spell was merely an inferior copy of that skill, but it was still among the most damaging spells in the game. It cleaved through the very fabric of space, and fresh blood fountained from Shaltir's chest. A hit from this powerful attack spell could disregard virtually any form of magical defense. But the damage dealt converted back into health and flowed back into her body, as though time itself had reversed to render the attack completely ineffective. Ains howled at this. What did you just do? There's no need to get worked up, Ains-sama. That was a skill too. Shaltir answered as she gloated over him. Che. In other words, my skills won't work and you can do as you please, huh? Please don't think this is unfair. This was an ability which Peroncino-sama bestowed upon me. In other words, that great being is superior to you. Am I wrong, Ains-sama? That felt like it came from the heart. That emotionless tone, or perhaps it was so calm that one could not pick out any emotions from it, filled Shaltir with doubt. However, before it could settle in, Ains shouted again. "Here I come, Shaltir. I'll show you that no matter what skills you have, none of them can hold a candle to my magic." Aha! You want a showdown of firepower then, Ains-sama? Don't think I'll lose to you. Maximize magic. Reality/spell crossed paths with a purifying javelin, each tearing into the bodies of their targets. As the two of them traded attacks again, Shaltir laughed at Ains's foolishness in her heart. At the same time, she was confused. Why am I fighting Ains-sama? Shaltir Bloodvathlen was a floor guardian of Nazarick, set over the first to third floors. At the same time, she was a loyal subordinate made by the supreme being Peroncino. That being the case, was it not bizarre that she would be fighting Ains-Gaon, who was formerly known as Manga? Why was she doing battle with Ains-sama, who was another member of the 41 supreme beings? If her creator had so ordered, she would obey and fight with all her strength. Even if all of Nazarick were her enemies, she would charge at them without a moment's hesitation. Yet, this was not the case. She thought and she thought and she thought, but she could not find an answer. Still, she could not stop herself. It was as though someone was whispering into her ear. "Shaltir, you have to kill the enemy with everything you have." Shaltir inspected Ains's MP consumption with mana essence, and then she fought to suppress the laughter rising in her heart. At the same time, she reversed time to recover her health. More powerful spells consumed more mana. Reality Slash was one of those spells, and it was quite inefficient, in terms of damage caused for mana expended. Even so, Ains was still using it. Shaltir thought that perhaps Ains was hoping to deplete her health and claim victory before the battle became a brawl. That's right, finishing it quickly is the right thing to do, because drawn-out battles are to my advantage. Perhaps it's also because Ains-sama knows that debuff spells have little effect on the undead. Shaltir narrowed her eyes and focused on Ains, who was still casting big spells. Very well, then I shall adapt to whatever he comes up with. Shaltir's skills were divided into the at-will and limited-use types. Turning back time to recover damage could only be done 3 times a day. The Purifying Lance was also only usable 3 times a day, while the Impure Shockwave Shield could only be used 1 more time today. Still, there was no point in being miserly about them. Shaltir's plan was to end the battle in a melee fight. Her MP and skills were essentially tools to deplete Ains's MP. I can fight without MP, but Ains-sama is finished without MP. Shaltir could fight with the total of her HP and MP, but Ains could only use his MP. This was the great disparity between them. She looked on Ains, who was limited to his spells, with a gentle expression in her eyes. One could call them the eyes of a mother looking upon her child. Or rather, the look of pity which the mighty would bestow upon the weak. After throwing her final purifying javelin, Shaltir accepted the reality/counterattack, and decided to move into the second phase of the battle. How about this, then? Summon monster 10th. As if I'd let you. Greater rejection. The summoned monsters were dispelled in an instant, and Ains's smug laughter reached her ears. I won't let you draw out the fight, Shaltir. I can't smile yet, though I was just trying to use up my MP after expending all my special abilities. Shaltir faked a stern expression, and then cast another spell. Really now? Then how about a direct attack? Maximize magic, Vermilion Nova. Triplet maximize magic, call Greater Thunder. The Crimson Blaze, one of Ains's weaknesses, engulfed to him, while 3 gigantic strokes of lightning earthed themselves through Shaltir's body. This was the first time in this battle that she had felt her health drop like a rock, which put a look of displeasure on Shaltir's face. Did he make preparations to resist fire? No matter how powerful one was, one could not prepare to resist all elemental attacks. There was a limit to that. Even if a heteromorphic character combined their racial resistances with job classes that granted resistances and outfitted themselves from head to toe in resistance-granting divine class gear. However, by focusing on specific resistances, a character could make themselves immune to elements to which they should have been weak. In other words, Ains had forsaken his other resistances and focused on raising his fire resistance. This might be troublesome. I have no idea which elemental resistances Ains-sama gave up. The only way to discern Ains's elemental weaknesses was to use life essence to check his HP and barrage him with attacks of multiple elements, then see which one hurt him the most. I'm not going to do something tedious like that. I'll target an element which he should be weak against. Maximize magic, brilliant radiance. Maximize magic, true dark. Holy element light wrapped Ains, purifying his body, while Shaltier's body was corroded by non-elemental darkness. In this moment Shaltier did not miss the fact that Ains had flinched. Although he was trying to cover it up by changing his stance, there was no way he could cover up the fact that he was trying to remain stoic in the face of pain. Shaltier smiled inwardly, because she had found his weakness. No, she could not blame him for that. After all, most undead were highly vulnerable to holy element attacks. It was very difficult to remove that weakness, and if he had geared himself to resist the fire element, there was no way for him to do so. The two of them locked eyes, and Shaltier cast her next spell. Naturally, the spell Shaltier had chosen was still Brilliant Radiance. They exchanged magic in this back-and-forth fashion for some time. Even Shaltier had lost a sizable amount of health. In fact, her HP, health, might well be zero had she not secretly used MP on skills which defended against spells. That's Ains-sama for you. He's far superior to me in spell battle, be it in attack or defense. I used several holy element spells in a row, but Ains-sama took a lot less HP damage than me. Still, I also made him burn a lot of MP too. From what she could see, Ains's MP was greatly reduced from how it had been when they had first started out. Even so, she could see Ains's fighting spirit burning in his eyes. It's getting hard to take. I want to break Ains-sama's magnificent will and turn him into a beaten dog. Shaltier forced herself to ignore the sensations welling up from her lower belly. If she were in her room, she would have called a vampire bride over, but she was on the battlefield, much to her regret. And of course, she could not comfort herself on the spot to slake her desires. That being the case, she would satisfy herself through combat. Shaltier looked at Ains with lust-moistened eyes, and she licked her lips. If she continued lengthening the distance between them, what sort of face would he make for her? Then, time to recover. Maximize magic, greater lethal. Positive energy restored the health of the living, while negative energy would damage them. However, the opposite was true for the undead. Thus, greater lethal, which channeled vast quantities of negative energy, was the most powerful healing spell that Shaltier, one of the undead, could cast. I see. It would seem I've lost quite some health as well. Greater lethal. Shaltier blinked several times, unable to believe what was happening before her eyes. However, she had to accept the fact that Ains's wounds were recovering before her eyes, even if she could not quite believe it. Why is it that you can cast the divine spell, Greater Lethal? Was it on your class's spell list? No, sadly, this is not an innate ability, but an effect from a magic item. This magic item only allows me to use a single specific spell, and requires me to use an equipment slot, nor can that spell be enhanced with skills. It is also much weaker than someone casting the spell off their own list, so you could say it has many drawbacks. As Ains complained, he used greater lethal, again, causing Shaltia in turn to mumble. That's a spanner in the works, isn't it? Still, her aim was to deplete her foe's MP, so the plan was not yet ruined. With that in mind, Shaltia continued casting greater lethal to recover her health. Since Shaltia was a level 100 character, it took a while for her to fully recover. At the end, she cast Maximize Magic, Greater Lethal, Body of Effulgent Beryl. After healing his wounds, Ains cast a defensive spell on himself. Shaltia was a divine magic caster, and she had not received much knowledge from Peroncino. Thus, she did not know what the Body of Effulgent Beryl spell did. However, the green radiance that surrounded Ains appeared once more, so Shaltia concluded that it must be some kind of defensive magic. That seems about right. I'll launch a direct attack next. Shaltia brandished her spear lance, but just as she was about to move, the words which had slipped from Ains's mouth entered her ears. What a disadvantageous fight! Shaltia had not expected this, and she loosened her grip on the spear lance. She was about to say, "Did you only realize that now?" Well, she wanted to say that, but Shaltia concluded that it would be disrespectful to mock Ains, her master, so she did not speak those words. My master. Ains-sama. That word kept appearing in her mind, and it confused her. Why was she bearing steel at her master, Ains-sama? Still, this was quite normal. There were many things in the world which were difficult to understand, and this was simply one of them. Having made that decision, she sensed that Ains's actions lacked consistency. Thus, in a casual tone which did not belong on the battlefield, she asked, "If you feel it is disadvantageous, why not retreat?" Well, you do have a point. Ains's skeletal face could not show any expressions, but for some reason, she had the feeling that he was smiling bitterly at her. Yes, that's right. I'm very stubborn, Shaltia. I don't want to run from this. Ains looked at one of his empty, skeletal hands. Shaltia's eyes went to that hand as well. Perhaps others will not understand why I have done this. Some might even think of me as a fool. Still, right now, I am enjoying my position as Guildmaster, because, well, I might have been Guildmaster, but all I did was mainly coordinate events or other sundry tasks. I hardly led from the front. Still, I am now standing on the front lines for the sake of the Guild. Perhaps it was simply to satisfy myself. Is that so? Is that what they call a man's imperative? Yes. Is it? It might be. Well, to some extent, I might have resigned myself to my fate. It seems we were almost interrupted by this pointless conversation. My apologies, let's start again.